Hey, welcome to the channel where we show you how to put some prep in your step. Today, we're going to keep on with our series of Tableau prep templates, and I know that we've been working our way through some of the popular Flurridge Twins templates, but because there's been such a positive reception to this, and I've really started to see the potential for this to become an amazing resource, I started reaching out to other people in the community who are known for their Tableau Viz templates, and getting them on board. And so today we're actually gonna go over a template, a design that was made by Tuan Huang, and this is the spaced donut chart. And so again, I want this to really become a useful resource, and I've actually started talking to some clients that I work with in creating these bespoke visualizations, and I started to sort of see that these templates really can help prepare the data in a better way. You know, I think originally I wanted to handle all of the data preparation that was happening in these workbooks in prep. And so now I'm trying to find ways to where you can just plug in your data set and it structures it the way that you need it to be structured and does the data densification that you need it to do. And so with this one, we're actually just going to go with the sample superstore data set and use prep to restructure it how we need it, and also kind of guide you to show you how you can plug in whatever data set that you're working with, and prep's going to take care of all of the heavy lifting for you. So let's dive in. So I've got Tableau prep opened up, and again, so these templates are something that you can plug your real world data into. What I'm going to do this time, instead of connecting to an Excel sheet that's filled out a certain way, I'm going to connect to the sample superstore data set. So I connect to that, and I'm going to pull in the orders table. And so I've pulled that in, and the first thing I'm going to do, so if we look back at the original template, let me pull that in here, and so we can see the data is constructed this way. And so we've got this party here, we've got values, what those values are, and we've got path and position. And so what's happening here is you can see that there are 4 rows for every value. And the reason there's 4 rows is because there's 1 value for each path and then 1 value for each position. And these are also percentage of totals. So what we're going to do in prep is we're going to define what we want to use as our dimension, what we want to use as our measure, and then we're going to have prep generate our path and position. And we're going to also generate that percentage of total within prep. So again, prep is going to do all of this heavy lifting for us and structure it how we need it to be structured. So the first thing I want to do here is I want to define what my dimension and my measure is. And so in this case, I'm going to use category as my dimension. I'm going to use sales as my measure. And I'm going to keep only those fields. And then I'm going to rename this to dimension. And I'm going to rename this to measure. And so again, first step, you can plug in any data set you want, and then you just define, how do I want my charts to be broken out? What category, what dimension do I want my charts to be broken out as? And what do I want the measure to be? What am I measuring the percent of total of? And so let's call this remove and rename. Okay. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to aggregate my measure to each dimension. So I'm going to create an aggregate step, pull in dimension to my grouped fields, pull measure to my aggregated fields. And so again, this gets me my data aggregated to each of those dimensions. And so here, I'll just call this aggregate measure. And I'm going to use these to get my percent of totals. So what percentage of the total is 836, 154, right? And so here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to add another clean step, and we'll call this percent of total. And so first thing I'm going to do, create a calculated field, call that total. And so here I'm going to use an LOD to get the total sales, right? So the total of my measure. Okay, so here's that total, and then we're going to create a percent of total. So we'll call this percent of total, and we'll say measure divided by total. And now we've got our percent of total. And so now that we've got that, we don't actually need the total field anymore. So we're going to get rid of that. So we've got our dimension, our measure, and what that measure is the percent of the total for all across all your rows. The next thing we're going to do is we're just going to create two calculations. One is going to be called join. And this is to join to the paths that we're about to create to densify. So just join with the value of 1. And then I'm going to create a field called 0 because this is actually a field that we need inside of the workbook. And since it's a non-aggregate, it's just a straight value field. I'll go ahead and put this in the prep flow. So there we go. We've got all of the fields that we need in our main data set. And again, this join field is what we're going to use to join it to the path and the position. Okay, so now that we've got that, we're going to do, again, one of my favorite things, and we're going to generate our path inside of the prep flow here. And again, this is something I've covered many times, so I'm just going to insert my steps in here. I'll link the video to go over exactly what this is doing. I'll just do a high-level overview of it real quick, but again, I've gone over it a bunch of times in my previous videos. So I'm going to go in here and insert my flow. I'm going to browse, and I've got this saved as dynamic scaffold steps. And so what I'm actually going to do here is I need values from, instead of 0 to 200, I need it to start at 1, and I need it to go to 360, and I'm actually going to rename that to path start and path end. Path start, path end, got it. And then I'm going to keep only those two fields. And so again, what this just did is I created two columns, one with the value of 1, one with the value of 360, and it's going to create those values for every row in my data set. But I only need one row with those values. And so let me just adjust the description here. I'm actually just going to go ahead and remove that. Don't really need it. When you download the actual built out prep flow, all of those descriptions will be built out for you. Okay, so again, I'm going to use the aggregate step to deduplicate my data. And so since I'm putting both of these fields in the grouped fields, it's going to return every unique combination of values in these columns. There's only one unique combination of those values. I only get one row. Next, I'm going to pivot those values by using a wildcard pivot on the word path, because we're going to use the new rows step to generate a scaffold, give me every value from 1 to 360. But to do that with an integer value, they've got to be in one column. And so that's why I pivot those two columns into one. And I removed the pivot names field that's automatically generated. Next, I put in my new rows step, and I'm going to use values from one field. That field is called path. And then here we go. I've got values generated for my scaffold, and I'm going to then just create this field called join to join it back to my main data set and densify my data. Next, what I'm going to do is generate the position now within my prep flow. So again, I'm going to come in here, back to my order step, and add a clean step. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to create two fields. So very similar to what we just did with the scaffold. I'm going to call this position start, and this is going to be a value of 1. And then I'm going to create another field called position end, and this is going to be a value of 1.2. And the reason I'm doing this is because in our actual visualization, the spaced donut chart, I need to define the length of each of the spaced bars in my chart. And so it starts at 1, goes to 1.2, and all of my bars around the circle will be that length. And so I only need those two fields. So I'm going to control and click those and keep only those and call this position. Again, it generates that value for every row in my data set. I only need one row. So I'm going to add an aggregate step, which when I group by both of my fields, is going to return every unique combination of values in those fields. There's only one. I get one in return, which is exactly what I want. Call that deduplicate. Here, I'm going to pivot those into one column and call this pivot position and use a wildcard pivot on position. And then I'm going to remove the pivot names field. And so this gives me my two position values. Now I don't need to scaffold this. I don't need to generate anything. I just needed these two values in one column. And so I'm using prep to do that work for me. And so now I've got my main flow here. We've got our data. And remember, every value here, what we're going to do is we're going to create a row for every value from 1 to 360, and then another row for each position. So when we do this, what we're first going to do is, let me take this scaffold with my 360 points and join that to my main data set. And it's going to automatically detect my join on the join fields. And so again, since each row here has a value of 1 and each row in my 360 has a value of 1, it's going to essentially multiply my rows here, my 3 rows, by 360. So I'm densifying that data, creating 360 points for each value of my data set. But now I need to re-densify my data and have 364 points at the position of 1 and another 360 points at the position of 1.2 for each value in my data set. And so we'll call this one densify, and then we're going to call this one re-densify, because that's what I'm doing. I'm re-densifying it again. And you'll see, let me add my join clauses here. I guess I forgot to do that real quick. Let me go back in my pivot position, create my join field. There's my join. And in here, in this join step, I'm actually going to come in and remove this duplicated join field because I only need 1. And so now, when I come in here, I can join there, re-densify, and there we go. So you can see it took my 1080 rows and multiplied them by 2. I end up with 2160. And so that, once I come in here and remove each of my join steps or my join fields, because I don't need them, this is what my data set needs to look like. Let me click here to my output. And let's call this space donut-yt. And so I can output this as a file, right? So let's say in this case, I'm outputting it as a local file, and I'm gonna run in my workbook. So when I run that, it's gonna generate my file real quick. And so now I'm gonna open up the donut chart workbook that I will include in the Google Drive. And we're just gonna plug that data source right in. And so this is what we're creating. So again, we needed 360 points at the value of 1 for each of the rows in our data set, or so we had furniture, office supplies, and technology. And so we generated 360 rows at the position of 1 and then 360 rows at the position of 1.2 to generate this spaced out donut chart look. So what I can do here now is edit the data source, edit that connection. So you can see it's connected to that packaged extract. And so I'm going to go into my prep repository, data sources, and find that spaced donut, open that up, and boom. All of the calculations that you need are in the workbook. It's ready to go. And so again, what this prep template is going to do is it's going to take your data set, you just pick which column you want to use as your dimension, which column you want to use as your measure, keep only those fields, rename them, the flow does the rest of the work for you. And then when you plug it into the workbook already has the charts built out, and so you've got your space charts with your percent of total. Now, you could also take that flow and output it instead as a published data source. And so I'm going to output that to my Tableau Online site. So let me just go in here. Sign into my Tableau Online site. Connect to my dev site. And again, so this is something that you could generate and make it, set it on a schedule, use it in a business dashboard. Now you should be cautious to only use it when it makes sense to use it. You don't want to use it just because it looks cool. But it is something that you could do with this prep template now. And so I could output this as a sample into my folder. I've actually already done this, so I'm not going to run it, but I'll just show you. If I connect here to a new data source, Tableau server, connect to my Tableau online. I'll have to sign in again real quick. So I've connected to my site here. I see my space donut chart data. Connect to that. And some errors, but should be fine. So I've got my data source connected here now, my published one, and I'm going to replace. And there you go. It changed my gray coloring here, but I can just go in, edit that to Seattle Grays, and boom, there you go. So again, Tuan really pioneered this template. He created the calculations. All I'm doing is just using prep in a way to where you can plug in your data and use this in a business dashboard. And so as I come out with more of these templates, I'm really starting to understand, again, how they need to be structured to be most useful and where they can be truly as plug and play as possible. And also teach you a way of, to understand what's happening behind the scenes and just in general prep techniques that as you're watching these build videos, you can incorporate into other things. So I hope you found this useful, and hope to see you again in the next one.